Welcome everyone to this second webinar in a 4-webinar series by WorkSafe Victoria. And we're going to be talking specifically about fatigue, and I'll move on to that in a moment. But just a reminder that we're here to answer your questions. And so if anything comes up with what I say or resources I show, please feel free to put it into the Q&A box, which is at the bottom of your screen. Today we have Kieran Keane here from us, and also Samantha Harrison from WorkSafe and the WorkWell team. And so they'll be joining us in the Q&A section because they have intimate knowledge of that area. I'll now just launch my slides. On a very important topic, reducing the risk of fatigue in the transport industry. And it's interesting, last week we had 73 people registered. Today we've got over 123. So obviously a very topical area. And, you know, as I mentioned last week, I think it's just incredibly admirable, the work that the transport industry has done during this incredibly difficult time. It really has been essential work, either from filling up our warehouses and supermarkets so that we can eat during the pandemic, but also with public transport. And so a big call out to all of you in this industry. Thank you so much for the great work you've been doing. As I mentioned, you know, we had 73 on the webinar last week, and 23 of you went to the WorkWell website to check out the resources there and logged in. We're going to be talking about specific resources for the fatigue area. And this is an incredibly important area of mental health. And so if you see things that are of interest and have questions about it, please ask that in the Q&A box. But I really recommend that you also go to the WorkWell website. We'll show you how to find that later. Log in, do a question which helps assess the things that you think are most relevant for your workplace as a manager or owner. And, you know, we'll explain a little bit of the customer journey when we go through some of the resources towards the latter third of this presentation. So today we're going to be talking about why the importance of mental health and fatigue. And of course, there's things that I shared last week, but there were some new stats as well that I'll be sharing today. We're going to be talking about why it's great to promote mental health. And you know, I think the fact that you're here today, giving your time, giving your energy, shows that you also believe this. And I want to share some advice and also some evidence which shows that why this is important and why all of us should do everything we can to have a mentally healthy workplace. We're going to be talking about the fatigue-related factors. You know, what is it that contributes to fatigue in the transport sector and also broader industries as well. We're then going to take you through the WorkWell resources, and there's some very good things there for you to consult once you log into the WorkWell website, and hope that you do that. And then we'll also be sharing some Are You OK resources. We've got some specific resources that relate to transport, and I look forward to talking that through with you. For those that weren't here last week, I'm Graham Cowan, and my background is that I worked in senior leadership before going through a real market turmoil. I went through a market crash, and I crashed and burned. I went through a very, very bad episode of depression for 5 years. And on that time, I was, you know, going through the income insurance protection sector, which is a little bit different to workers' compensation. But I learned firsthand about how difficult it is to be out of work. And I want to share some of those insights. After I started to come back, and I came back through a combination of exercise, reconnecting with family and friends, meditation, and then finally writing a series of books. And you can see some of the books I've written downstairs, particularly in the Back from the Brink range. In those books, I actually surveyed and asked people, what was it that helped you most in coming back from the red zone or back from depression or anxiety. And I also surveyed or interviewed a number of people to gain additional insights there. And I want to share some of those reflections today, but also why we as leaders and managers should be focusing on prevention and focusing on being proactive and realizing that actually having a mentally healthy workplace is not just good for our well-being, but it's also fantastic for the performance of the team as well. And, you know, we've all been in teams that do work well together, that support each other. And I just want to go through some of the evidence around that as well. And likewise, we're in a team which doesn't work well, which is toxic, where there might be bullying. That's, of course, not good for our work performance or for our well-being. But before we do, I just want to ask a poll, and you can see that there, employee fatigue is a significant issue in the transport logistics industry right now. And I'm just going to launch this poll and ask you to just vote on this. So just launching the poll now. So please just answer that there, just on your screen in front. We've now got, I'll close it off in 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. Closing the poll now and sharing the results. And, you know, as we can see there, 54% of you strongly agree with this statement, and it just reinforces why what we're talking about today is important for your organization. If it's a significant issue, it's a significant risk, and knowing practical things we can do is incredibly important. So thank you for sharing that. And, you know, I guess that adds up to 88% of you believe that it's an issue. So thank you. So what are some specific things that relate to mental health and fatigue in the transport industry? Well, research shows that 50 deaths were estimated to be caused last year by fatigue on the roads in Victoria. A big number, and if you think of that as being the pointy end, the total impact is obviously much, much larger than that. So it doesn't include smaller accidents or what have you. And I think something which is specifically related to fatigue is how we work with people and how we schedule people. And when people are awake for 17 hours, it's the equivalent of being 0.05 on a blood alcohol content test. This, you know, really graphically demonstrates how it impairs our effectiveness and why it should be a focus for all of us. But even when we consider, you know, stress and what have you, I think this is a really interesting finding from Harvard Business Review that shows that workplace stress leads to a 50% higher voluntary turnover rate than when it isn't stressful. So if you have a mentally unhealthy workplace, you potentially have a turnover 50% higher of people you don't want to lose. So when they say voluntary, it's people you don't want to lose. So again, another really important business reason to really think about how we promote a mentally healthy workplace. And this is actually from an Australian study which was published in Lancet. And it shows here that if managers have some basic mental health training, it delivers almost a tenfold return on investment. So if you invest $1 in doing it, will return $10 to you. An incredible result. And, you know, again, just really reinforces the importance of our having a mentally healthy workplace and having leaders that understand how to create that. And this also, you know, just tells us this is a pre-COVID assessment by the CSIRO, and they identified rising work stress and mental health issues as a top 6 megatrend for the next 20 years. And as I said, that was pre-COVID. So, you know, if we are interested in our organization performing well and through this turmoil, it just reinforces how important it is for us to really focus on this area. This is of course, really brings it home. For you as managers and leaders, you're responsible for, creating the right culture in your organization. But this really reinforces the importance of self-care. And one of the big messages I'd like you to take away from this is that self-care isn't selfish. Doing the right things is not only beneficial for us, but also for our team and our organization. And the important elements of this, of course, include things like, getting enough exercise each day, getting a brisk walk in each day, getting good rest and good sleep, and eating well. Doing that as managers and leaders flows on to our team, because when we are in a positive mood, it's been shown by evidence that we're more creative, more influential, and more productive. So please don't, as we talk about doing the planning for our organization and the strategy for our organization, please don't forget to make your own well-being a priority. This is a handy way to think of it. And as I said before, if you start on the right-hand side, it's talking about the tertiary strategies. And tertiary strategies is where you endeavor to help someone who's been injured or is in close to injury, who could be experiencing anxiety or depression. And most organizations in Australia have really focused on this area, and it's a very expensive area. It takes a long time. If someone is actually at a point where they are depressed or have an anxiety disorder, it is really, really hard and expensive to get them to turn around. Secondary, the one in the middle, is where we decide to do things to better equip people for managing stress. And so that includes things like, doing resilience training, relaxation training, mindfulness training, things that can help people to get clarity, to be more calm. But on the left is the one that I'd really like to encourage you to really think about, because this came from quite a big study by Professor Anthony Lamontagna from Victoria. And he did a huge peer review study around the world for Vic Health. And he identified that a primary approach, and think of primary as prevention or proactive, and that will help you to remember it, prevention or proactive. And he found that the best results for both the organization, but also employees, was taking a systemic approach, identifying what the risks are and doing something about it proactively. So as we go through this, I'd really encourage you to think about, we're much better off to address things up the front rather than trying to fix them after there's been someone who's really distressed. I might just add now that in the front of you is the Q&A. And so if there's any questions or comments or whatever, please feel free to put the questions in there. We're going to be coming to questions towards the end. And if there are more questions that take us past the 1:30, we'll certainly keep hanging on to answer those for you. In terms of any issues you're having with the technology or what have you, please just put that in the chat box, and Jenny, who's curating things behind, will address this. So on your screen here are the work-related factors that can create a work-related mental injury. And it's things like low job control, poor support, low role clarity, poor environmental conditions, violent or traumatic events. And all of these, something I shared last week was that if we can create a culture of care, that really helps address these things, because we have a culture of care. We want people to be healthy. We want people to be productive. We want people to be fulfilled. And Gallup research tells us, they've done research around engagement and discretionary effort, and they've found that if people agree with this statement, my supervisor or someone at work seems to care about me as a person, that means the higher the productivity, the higher the influence, and the higher the customer service level, the higher the profit. So great reasons to be doing this. So when you think about these things in front of you, what do you decide to focus on? You might have some ideas of what could be important, but before we touch on that, I want to talk about what happens if we don't? And potentially it begins like this. If you just look where number one is, it's looking at the work-related risk factors. If we don't monitor them and do something about it, they become psychosocial hazards, which really means people more prone to be stressed, more prone to having, mental illness. That's number two. If that's not addressed, we can get inappropriate behaviours, things like bullying and harassment, discrimination, and that's been shown to happen. When we had the webinar last week, we were told that one of the most accessed things in the WorkSafe Toolkit was the segments around bullying and harassment. So it is a significant issue because then it relates to, can have an impact on mental health and mental injury. I have a good friend who's a workplace lawyer and does a lot of investigations around workplace injuries. And she just says that time and time again, there's a clear pathway. It's not something that happens quickly. It's something that happens over a period of time. And so the more we can be more proactive about this, the better. So what do we focus on? There's many, many things, as you saw on the last slide. And I'm going to be sharing in a few slides coming a checklist that will enable you to really determine what could be risk factors for you right now. So we've talked about fatigue, we've talked about tiredness, we've talked about the stress that causes and the impact on productivity, on turnover of staff, etc. And I know there are a lot of unique elements to the transport industry. You have people like drivers who are geographically remote for a long period of time. What can you do to help connect with them, to help them feel connected with each other when they're away driving? Train drivers, etc., and bus drivers, what do we do there? So I want to talk now about some of the factors that you can access for free from the WorkWell Toolkit and just determine what might be helpful. So this is something that's put together by WorkSafe Victoria. It's a step-by-step approach, and we're going to be talking through each of those steps in a moment. It has lots of tools and information, and again, I'll be sharing some of the ones that they have there. And you can track your progress and share information that is relevant. So that just gave a quick overview of the WorkWell website and how you sign into your industry. You have specific resources for your industry, and you choose what you want to focus on. As you might have seen, there's a huge range of resources, and that's a list of some of them there. And today we're just going to be focusing on fatigue and what we can do to address that. But as you can see, there's information there about how you do things around respect or bullying or capability. There's what you need is all there in one place, which is, very, very handy. So this is the section relating to fatigue. And, what we need to do, step one, is to understand the impact of fatigue on workers. And if you want any more information on this, this is one of the unique resources that is within the WorkWell website. This enables you to know what's there and to give you an overview of what it's all about, the size of and scope of the problem, but also what to do about it. We then also talk about the concept. Well, step two is to develop a workplace culture where fatigue is recognized as a health and safety risk. And so this could be doing a draft or a template of your fatigue policy. And I'll share with you a document which is in the WorkWell website, a Word document which you can download and modify according to what you want to do in your organization. And step 3 is about how you have discussions with your employees about fatigue, how we reveal that it's, there's much greater acceptance in the community talking about fatigue and mental health issues, and to ask your team, ask the individuals, what can we do on? And I really recommend that you don't try to do too many things at once, that you really, as a group, as a team, decide on just one thing you're going to focus on for the next 90 days in agreement with your team, and talk about what strategies you can take to do that. And I'm going to be revealing in a moment a checklist to help you identify all the risk factors and then decide, what could be most appropriate for your organization, being it little or large. So this is the draft Word document you can download. This is a sample template, but you could just go through it and adjust that with the questions that you have, and not the question you have, sorry, the things you want to focus on. But you have a skeleton to start with, which is a great place to be. You can just amend that and edit it as you see fit. And I would also add this, what you do inside the toolkit is confidential. WorkWell and WorkSafe just see holistic statistics. They don't see individual activity. So they just do that to look at the customer experience and how they can make that work better. And how to talk with, how to consult with your employees. And what we're looking for here is really having psychologically safe discussions. And what that means is that people can make suggestions and they won't be pounced upon. We don't say, don't know, that will never work. We ask, tell me more. How can we make it work in our environment? Does anyone else have some ideas? And so the psychological safety is very fragile. If we pounce on an idea and say it'll never work, it will really limit the comfort people have in making suggestions. And when people are involved in the suggestions, involved in helping to make the decision, they're much more likely to embrace it and run with it in their organization. So this is how we do that. So step 4 is to check fatigue is covered in your risk assessment. And I'm going to be showing you in a moment this risk assessment checklist, which is very, very helpful to think about the elements of fatigue that your team could be having. Step 5 is with your employees deciding on that one thing that you want to focus on for the next 90 days, the one thing that if you do it consistently, everyone makes an effort to make some progress in a particular area and has check-ins that you can really move the needle for your employees, your team, your organization. And of course, step 6 is evaluate and continuously improve. So this is the checklist. Of course, you can't read it there, but I'll just highlight now the different components that this checklist looks at. So it looks at mental and physical work demands. Is the work you do or the work that your team do really, really repetitive? Is there physical work which could really wear people down? The next thing is work scheduling. Do you have policies about how many hours people put in a week? The policies around shift work, do you have things in place there? So there's guidance there on what you could do to help start a process on improving the workplace. And then also working time. Are people not working the ridiculous hours? As we saw before, if people work 17 hours, it's the equivalent of someone being drunk, being 0.05 on the alcohol area. And finally, environmental conditions. Do they work where there's really high noise, where there's really high risk of physical injury? These are all important to know about and to help you focus, to help you and your team focus on what might make the most difference in deciding what you're going to look at for the next 90 days. So these resources are free and they can be found from the WorkWell website. And in fact, that's the URL. And if you want, you can take a photo of that. But I've also found if you just Google WorkWell Vic, it will take you to exactly to the place where you log in. When you log in, as I said, there's a short questionnaire where you talk about your industry, the number of people that work for you, And then you're also asked, what are the most important elements you think in creating a mentally healthy workplace? And that then feeds into the resources that are shown to you. As I mentioned, I've been involved with Are You OK since the beginning in 2009. I'm board director. And want to specifically mention some of the resources that relate to the transport industry. We worked with TrackSafe and developed a whole series of resources for the train industry, for example. And not so long back, there was the Are You OK Rail Day, which is a great resource. And I would just also add that, if other industries such as, the buses or other drivers wanted to create a unique resource and set of resources, that can be done in partnership with Are You OK? Just to let you know, to go through the whole process and to put that together costs around $50,000 to do the focus groups and make that happen. But if you as a industry group decided that was something you wanted to focus on, please just contact me via LinkedIn or whatever, and just let me know. In addition to the TrackSafe resources, there's also resources and stuff for the motor trades and relating specifically to the car industry, and also for what we call Are You OK Away? And it was specifically targeted for FIFO workers, fly in, fly out workers, but it could well apply some of those resources to people in your organisation that might spend a long time away and away from family and friends. So that can be checked out from the Are You OK website, where the thing is below, the address is below. This is kind of a new thing that WorkSafe Victoria has helped to fund. And what it's about is helping public transport workers navigating their late career and transition to retirement. And, we're going to have some more information about that. If people are interested, please ask a question. And if we can't answer it, we'll make sure we get back to you. But, if you are in the, do have some older workers, and let's face it, the transport industry does have a very mature workforce. And if you'd like to know more about that and how your organisation could be involved, please let us know. So these are the coming webinars we have. So as you can see, we've got one around the risk of trauma, and that's on July 9, and July 16 is about how you manage and improve the mental health of your contractors and subcontractors, how you can help contribute to that, which is an element that is very important in this industry. So we might, we've got our Q&A on now, and please just ask any questions you may have about mental health in the workplace, about your own mental health, about any of the things that was discussed, any of the resources that was discussed. And if I could just ask Kieran and Samantha just turn on their camera and their microphone, they'll be able to answer any of the questions that are here. Now we've got Jenny behind the scenes just curating the questions. So do we have any questions, Jenny?
We certainly do, Graham. So the first question would be for Kieran. Someone who would like to know if the WorkWell Toolkit is available in New South Wales for the transport people there as well.
Yes, thank you, Jenny, and thank you to whoever asked that one. That's a really interesting one. So when developing the toolkit and the content on the toolkit, it is directed at Victorian workplaces, so those employers and leaders, but it is not to say that it hasn't been used across Australia, actually. So people can log into the toolkit from across Australia, and I know we've even had a couple of internationals too, because when writing that information, we're implementing strategies that can cross boundaries and state borders too. So it is just to be mindful that we do work around Victorian legislation. We refer a lot to WorkSafe Victoria guidance, so that probably changes a little bit, but often the information is can be used across Australia and different states.
Great. Okay, so someone else has asked, so companies are already using the toolkit, are they, Kieran?
Yeah, definitely. So just overall, we have over 6,000 users on the toolkit, and I do know that we are edging closer to the 6,500 mark, which is obviously a really fantastic number. But what we'd like to see from a WorkWell point of view is that people jump on after this website, sign up, and actually see what content is on there and can help your workplace straight away.
Great. And while we've got you here, another question for you. So the steps that we talk about, for example, with fatigue, how do you come up with the steps in an action?
Yes, it's actually quite a rigorous process. So not only for fatigue, but all the actions on the toolkit. And we probably go through a couple of different phases. And what I mean by that is that initial phase, we do a bit of a scoping session. So understanding what information and research is already out there. So we look at our own WorkSafe data and claim information. Also those reputable documents published. So whether that's from Beyond Blue or Are You OK? And that helps establish a bit of a baseline. But then we move into probably the most important stage, which is the consultation. So we work internally within WorkSafe. So there's a lot of subject matter experts internally that we rely on. But then we also go externally too. So we're actually having chats and consulting and running workshops with employers, employees, and also getting the input of unions and also employer associations. Then finally, once we've got all of those insights and experience, we move into that last phase, which is actually writing the content and putting them into those practical step-by-step information, which is not only correct, but hopefully the most practical and relevant for the toolkit user.
Fantastic. So a couple of questions for Samantha now. What are some of the ways that you might spot signs of fatigue in employees?
Yeah, so there's a bit of this information in our guidance material, and I should point out we are updating the guidance material at the moment. So we'll have some newer version coming out hopefully fairly soon. It's going through the consultation phase at the moment. But some ways to spot fatigue. So you can sort of see fatigue in different people in different ways, and it might be something that you sort of recognise within yourself. So you might find that your eyelids are heavy, for example, so it actually feels like you're tired, and your head might be drooping and your blurred vision and those sort of things. When you're trying to recognise it in other people, you might notice that they're not communicating as well as they normally would. You might be able to see that they're actually stressed. They might have increased stress levels. They've got decreased tolerance for things that might go wrong at work, or things that might not go quite their way. They might take more risk-taking behaviour. They might make errors more frequently and that sort of thing, or have lapses in attention. And from a transport perspective, it's these things are quite key, because often transport workers are working on their own. It's not always, obviously, but often they're working on their own. So it's important that those workers can understand these signs within themselves, so they know when that they need to stop or take a break, or actually highlight to their employers that they believe that they're fatigued, and having that like a positive workplace where they can actually bring those and supportive workplace where they can bring those issues up and say, actually, I'm not feeling great at the moment. I think I'm working too many hours, or I have to drive too far, or I don't have enough breaks, or the work task. So Graham was mentioning the work demands and things, or the work-related factors that actually impact on fatigue, and all of those relate in to how you can actually consult with your workers on creating better solutions in the workplace as well.
Fantastic. So what are some of the practical ways that you've seen workplace fatigue managed really well?
Sort of, there's lots of different ways. Again, so we like to see things from a proactive perspective, and that is looking at those work-related factors and actually designing them out to start with. So it might be looking at your job design and actually planning those tasks, or those, if it's a truck route, for example, actually planning the route out so that there are rest stops along the way. Could be double up driving, or that sort of thing as well, that might actually be a proactive measure to prevent fatigue coming on in the first place. Looking at the rostering system and making sure that you're not rostering people on for too many shifts in a row, or too many night shifts, or whatever it might be. Again, it's creating that positive culture, like I was saying before, about having the ability to call in when you're too fatigued, or those sorts of things. There's also reactive measures that can be taken as well. So it might be that, or when there's an indication of fatigue, that you share or reduce the number of tasks or the type of work that you're actually doing, or finishing early, but understanding that there might be consequences for others who need to take up the slack of people who might have to finish early because from a fatigue perspective. So for us, from a prevention perspective, it's better to look at that those proactive measures that you can put in place. Think about the work in advance, consult with your employees who are doing the work, and they've often got the best solutions to actually provide mitigating strategies for it.
Great, thanks Samantha. There's also been a couple of comments just made in the chat room. Some people are asking, will there be recordings of this? And yes, there will. You'll be sent recordings of this webinar, and we'll also going to have all the webinars, the 4 webinars in one place that you can refer to later. So that will certainly be on its way. We're now at 1:35. Any other questions, Jenny? Might just have time for 1 or 2 more questions.
No other questions, but one of our attendees has found some New South Wales resources as well, so we can put that into the chat box, the link to that.
Yeah, I might just quickly jump in there as well. In the fatigue action on the transport toolkit, we actually use a case study video from a New South Wales transport company and what they're doing to manage and prevent fatigue in the workplace. So really relevant there.
Yeah, and I think that is something about WorkWell, is that you have tried to get resources from anywhere in Australia. So I've been through there, and there's been resources from Safe Work Australia, for example. And as you mentioned, Kieran, that video specifically for the transport industry about how they've gone about approaching things in that area. Yep. So if there's no more questions, we'll call it.
I've had, sorry, just one more comment.
Oh, sorry, yep.
One comment has just come in, so it's more of a comment than a question, but they've said that companies can make drivers wait for several hours for paperwork, but then claim there is no fatigue as the driver is not working. Waiting is a major fatigue factor, and the drivers are then still expected to arrive on time.
Yeah, that's a really interesting one, and often organisations don't see that as being on time, if you like, as in they don't see it as work time. But from a work perspective, it is actually seen as work time. So from a work safe perspective, we would see the whole time that they're on shift as being there on time. So fatigue would still be a factor.
Excellent, and it can certainly be fatiguing just waiting around. You know, if you can't see your friends or family, you're waiting around, so not easy. Thanks once again for joining us today. Thank you, Samantha. Thank you, Kieran, for being part of this number 2. The next webinar is going to be next Thursday, and it's going to be about understanding and managing the risks around trauma. And this particularly relates to the train and railway industry, and of course the trucking and transport industry. So we'll look forward to seeing you same time next week, same time, same place. All the best for now.